Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name is Jason Jones, joined by James Copley and Phil Smith. This week we're back up to a full contingent, and we're going to need it as well because there's plenty of stuff to be discussing, plenty of action on the field, plenty of action in the transfer market as well. I'm going to start at Burnley on Friday night, 0-0 draw for Sunderland at Turf Moor. Obviously, Phil, a game that ended in really difficult circumstances for Sunderland, given those two missed penalties. I'm just sort of interested to get your thoughts on the match as a whole, because were there signs of positivity in there as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a weird one, sort of once the dust had settled a little bit on the game, try to make a bit of sense of it. And I think probably there were contrasting emotions in terms of, as you alluded to there, because of the way the game ended, like an absolute understanding that this could have been a massive night in the promotion race in a negative sense. I think for Burnley to get out of that game with a point, the way they handled it, could be huge for them, and for Sunderland, obviously, you don't get many opportunities to land like a direct blow on your rivals, especially away from home, very often. So you did come away with that fear that it could be a night that we look back at the end of the season and say that was massive. That was a really huge moment in Sunderland potentially not making the top two. And yeah, I had this really positive emotion of just how well, after the opening exchanges when Burnley were clearly dominant, how well Sunderland had played. They hadn't just competed by putting everyone behind the ball and being really dogged and putting in a big shift and stuff. They looked every bit as good as a footballing team as Burnley did for the last hour of the game. And by the end of the game, they were the only team who looked like scoring a goal. So I think I'm trying to be positive and take from the fact that surely inside that dressing room, they must be looking at each other going, now, we can beat anyone at this level. We can outplay anyone at this level, and hope that the confidence they take from that outweighs the sort of the blow, if you like, of how the game actually ended.
It's something that Phil just sort of alluded to there, James. But again, we sort of come out of a top of the table clash involving Sunderland, in which they have more than proven that they are capable of going to toe to toe rather with anybody in this division.
Yeah, I think that second half was really pleasing. I think Sunderland had 4 corners to Burnley's 1, 12 shots to 4, 9 shots in the box compared to Burnley's 3. I think they had 5 big chances, hit the woodwork once, and obviously those 2 penalties as well. I thought in the opening exchanges, Burnley did quite well in the first half, and I was a little bit worried, but it was pleasing to see how Sunderland sort of managed to bend the game to the will. I agree with Phil, it is a little bit of an opportunity missed. I do think, though, that 4 points from Burnley this season is not a bad return, and more generally, if you look at Sunderland versus teams in the top 6 currently, they've taken 12 points, which is a more than healthy return, and they still have Blackburn Rovers, Middlesbrough and Leeds United to come, so I think it's all to play for. A couple of those games are away, and Borough and Leeds, they're very, very, very hard games, so we'll have to see what happens. But I was encouraged by the performance against Burnley. But I think it is one of those whereby if Sunderland go and beat Derby and Plymouth, we'll look back at this Burnley point as one gained. However, if Sunderland slip up in one or both of those games, you're looking back at it as a real opportunity missed. I don't think anything is decided against Burnley away. It would have been a statement, but there's just still so much to play for, and Sunderland is still in touch and distance. A lot of the big 6 have to play each other as well. So I understand the frustrations around the game 100%, but I think it is a good point, although a slight opportunity missed as well.
And just a word on Wilson Isidore, Phil. Obviously stepped up and took both penalties on Friday night, both penalties saved. And it has to be said, saved well by James Trafford. They weren't necessarily poor penalties, and I know that's something that Regis Lebris sort of alluded to in his post-match comments. But where does he go from here now, Wilson? Because obviously it's such a huge disappointment for him to personally have to absorb. But do you see him bouncing back from that pretty quickly?
I think so. I think we could all see how devastated he was at the end of the game. That's obviously going to take its toll, but I get the impression from Isidore that he's a pretty big character, and I think he'll probably bounce back in a positive sense. I think it was almost like the life of a striker, really. You're defined by what happens in the box, aren't you? Because I thought, by and large, Isidore produced a really good performance on Friday. I think that I wasn't overly impressed by Burnley in a lot of phases of the game, given the quality that they have. But the one thing I did think was that their two centre-halves and their goalkeeper were outstanding, especially Esteve. I think he's a brilliant defender, and actually you can see why Burnley are where they are, because it's clear they don't concede many goals because they've got two brilliant centre-halves and a good goalkeeper. I thought Isidore was excellent. I thought he gave them a real fright, ran his socks off, never stopped running, showed bits of quality at times. So I'm pretty confident that Isidore will bounce back in the right way. The thing that we've always said about Isidore since he arrived is that you know what you're going to get as a minimum from Isidore, and that's a huge shift. He'll never stop running. He'll cause the defenders nightmares. The happy bonus so far is that he's also found a way to chip in with goals, and I'm pretty sure that will continue. So I don't have a huge amount of concern about Isidore, to be honest. I think it's good that there's a game tomorrow. I think it's good for him just to get back out on the pitch and start again and doesn't have to dwell on it too long. I think he's going to be a pretty big player. I mean, the harder thing for Sunderland is what they do with penalties next, really, isn't it? Because Isidore has got a brilliant penalty scoring record in his career. That's why he was the one who took over after Roberts missed the last one. I think you have to give Trafford some credit because the preparation was obviously really good. And as you mentioned, although Isidore didn't find the corner with either of his efforts, they were really powerfully struck, especially the first one. Pretty impressive reflexes from Trafford. So I don't know what on earth Sunderland do next time to win a penalty. I'm glad that's not my job to work that out. But I don't really have any major concerns about Isidore, to be honest, moving forward. I think there's a reason why he's a centre forward. I think he's got the personality for it, and I wouldn't be surprised if he scores at least one goal this week, to be honest.
Obviously, hindsight's a wonderful thing, James. Wilson stepping up and taking a second penalty against Trafford. I mean, was that? I mean, obviously he didn't score, so you can't necessarily say it was the right decision. But do you understand the reasoning behind him being the man to step up again and trying to score that second penalty?
I do, yeah, and it's purely outcome based, isn't it? Our analysis of it, because he missed the second penalty, so obviously it was the wrong decision. Doesn't mean it couldn't have been the right decision. We've seen precedent for this at Sunderland over the years against Burnley. Actually, David Connolly at the Stadium of Light, he stepped up, missed one. Burnley went 2-1 up, and then everyone remembers Carlos Edwards' fantastic goal, but Connolly actually stepped up to take a second penalty and scored. I think Darren Bent missed 2 in one game and scored one against Tottenham at the Stadium of Light. That was the Bolo Zenden game. It's bizarre. It does happen. I've got no issue with him stepping up to the second one. I think if it goes in, everyone's hailing him as a hero and, commenting about the guts and the bravery. I was just gutted for him at the end of the game. He was, visibly upset. He looked to be close to tears, if not in tears. I thought it was wonderful how Sunderland's squad rallied around him. I thought it was really classy of the Burnley player Forster to sort of go over and console him. I think the reaction from the away end was largely positive, though, wasn't it? And I think that's a really good barometer. Sunderland are going to need Wilson Easter towards the back end of the season. He's proven himself as a good player. He's the club's top scorer. Some of the vitriol online, the less said about that, the better. But it was heartening to see a lot of people rally around him. And we've spoken, haven't we, Phil and Jace, about Isidore and his arrival to the club and how genuine he's been, because when he first arrived and he was saying all of this stuff about wanting to score 15 goals and modelling his game off Thierry Henry and Sunderland being the biggest club in the North East, you are cynical and you do take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Maybe he's just trying to get the fans on side, but having met him a couple of times and watched his interviews, he's just that sort of character. He loves it. He's really bought into Sunderland. That's lovely to see. We've had a lot of players over the years who haven't bought into Sunderland, the likes of, Dillabodji, Darren Gibson, Ndong, all of these players from that ill-fated sort of Premier League era who didn't do much for Sunderland at all and deserved all of the criticism in the world that they got. Wilson Isidore is not one of those players. So yes, let's, criticise him missing 2 penalties against Burnley. That's absolutely fair enough. But, we're going to need him. He's a good player and he's good. He knows that. But I think it's just time to move on and support him. I think actually it's interesting the sort of, I think on a wider debate, have Sunderland's coaching staff been strong enough about penalties this season? Because Jack Clark was the penalty taker, wasn't he? He left, so it's sort of just got passed to Roberts in terms of him being the most senior player. He then missed one, and then it's Isidore's come in. So it doesn't feel like there's been too much of a plan. Maybe I'm being uber critical there, but perhaps that's something that could be ironed out a bit more.
There was There was a meeting after Roberts missed the last one, and Isidore became the penalty taker because obviously he wasn't at the club when Roberts took the first penalty of the season, and Roberts scored it. So that's how he got the second one. It was something that was I asked in the next press conference we had. I asked Lebris, and he said there would be a meeting. So I'm pretty sure that what subsequently happened was Isidore was put on penalties. Isidore's taken penalties in his youth career. He's taken penalties in the senior career. As far as I'm aware, he's never missed one. So I think that, to be honest, I have absolutely no issue with Isidore taking the first two penalties on Friday night. I think it was the right decision. I mean, it makes sense with his record. As I said, you've got to give Trafford a lot of quality for his preparation and also having the skill to back up the preparation to make the saves. I do think it's clearly something they're going to have another conversation about, isn't it, as a group?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is Wilson still happy to do it? If not, do we have a better option? Who else is happy to do it? So yeah, I do think I agree with you. I think it was something that for a while had just sort of stumbled along. So I don't know if you remember, but at the start of last season, obviously Ahmad and Ross Stewart went, and basically the dressing room decided whoever won a penalty could take it. So that was how Clark became Sunderland's penalty taker last season. He kept scoring them, so you just don't touch it, do you? And then obviously once Clark went, we stumbled into Roberts a bit, and fair play to Roberts, he scored the first one. So I do think that actually, for the first time, there may actually be a discussion where Wilson became the club's penalty taker, but it's clearly something they're going to have to double check again. Personally, I would let Isidore have the next one if he wants it, but that's just my opinion. Depends who else in the squad is potentially prepared to do it. But yeah, I think you have to. It wasn't just total chance Isidore taking a penalty. It's something he's done in his career, and he's done it well.
They need to have the old ill-fated penalty competition in training, don't they?
That's my stuff.
Yeah.
It's worked so well for England over the years.
Famously. Obviously, another big talking point as well, Phil. Enzo Lafay made his Sunderland debut. I mean, what did you make of his performance?
Yeah, it was, to be honest, to a degree, it was kind of what I expected. I think it was going to be really difficult for him on the left wing against a team of Burnley's quality in a game where Sunderland weren't going to dominate possession. I don't think he was ever going to produce a 10 out of 10 performance, And I think the first half, naturally, because Burnley were on top for most of it, he spent most of his game doing defensive work, which meant that we didn't see the best of him. But, and something Dan Neil mentioned afterwards, which I thought was spot on, was it's a really big tick that he just went out on the left wing. He helped Sirkin out. He dug in for the team. He got through his defensive work. I think that tells you a lot of good stuff about his attitude. And then the second half, there were a few more flashes. I mean, I think that sort of run and pass to Isidore was a genuine, obviously press boxes in the sort of Burnley stands, and there were genuine sort of gasps when he went past Roberts. And then when people had realised he'd found Isidore, that was just a moment of total class. So really, really exciting, albeit, it wasn't a particularly headline-grabbing performance. I think we'll see more of his quality when Sunderland are dominating the ball. I'm looking at Plymouth coming to the stadium out on Saturday. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I imagine they're going to defend pretty deep. And that's when we're going to need players like Lafay to show that bit of quality. So without it being a sensational debut, I thought there was quietly a lot of very encouraging signs in the way he applied himself.
And also exciting, James, he's producing those sort of passes and those moments of brilliance from the left flank. But when he's playing in his more natural position, it's sort of doubly exciting to imagine what he might be able to do when he's in a more familiar sort of berth.
Yeah, I need to shout out my friend Adam Reek, because he said to me leading up to the game, I think Lebris will play Lafay on the left-hand side of attack. And I actually called him an idiot. I said, nah, that won't happen. He's going straight to the middle. And then I looked a right idiot when the team sheet dropped, not for the first time, not for the last time either. But yeah, I thought he was very tidy. I thought he, when he went down the left in the first half and skied that cross well over the bar, you were a little bit worried, but yeah, just very tidy. And for a player who hasn't been at the club that long, I thought it was encouraging. He's going to obviously develop alongside his teammates those little connections, those little links that Lebris likes to mention so often. That pass for Wilson Isidore, as Phil mentions, it was breathtaking. But yeah, looking forward to seeing him more. I'm really interested to see where he plays now, actually, against Derby and Plymouth, and sort of coming into the championship running, because you would suspect he goes into the middle at some point, but who drops out, I don't know. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on, I think.
And one last quick word on the Burnley game, Phil. Slight injury concern for Chris Mepham. Is there any sort of update on that at the moment?
Not particularly. Other than it wasn't cramp, it was a pain in his hamstring, which is kind of like the words you never want to hear, obviously. But we don't know at the moment the severity of it, so I'd be reluctant to sort of speculate too much, especially because we'll speak to Lebris this afternoon at his pre-derby press conference. So anyone watching and listening, hop over to the Echo website later this afternoon, and we should have a bit more detail on that. But it's never a good sign. You knew straight away. He didn't even get any treatment. He just left the pitch to go and sort of get treated. So we knew straight away there was an issue. So I would suggest my amateur sports science would be that doesn't look great for the couple of games this week. But in terms of whether it's anything more significant than that, we'll have to wait and see. I think till this afternoon.
What a thoroughly professional and smooth plug that was, by the way, Phil. That was excellent.
Well, it's true, isn't it? It's pointless me speculating. People can get it from the great man Lebris himself in just a few hours. So, yeah.
And another thing I'm sure you're going to be sort of tentatively picking his brains about as well are transfers. Lots of transfer speculation at the moment on Weir's side. One name that is being increasingly linked and with a decent amount of ferocity is Mattia Frigan, the KVC Westerlo striker. I mean, do we have any sort of update on where that stands at the moment?
No, not a huge amount for me personally, other than to say that he is a name that I've been aware of in previous windows. He's definitely something that's one of those players that Sunderland have liked for a long time. By all accounts, he's having his sort of best season yet. So I think there's an obvious, people can join the dots there, that there's an obvious sort of strength to those reports. From what I can gather, he is quite versatile as well, which is definitely something we know appeals to Sunderland. My feeling going into this window was that Sunderland would very much target championship experienced players. Now, I know people will say, well, Enzo Lafayette never played in the championship, but as I think Lebris has explained in quite a lot of detail, they felt he was a bit of an exception to the rule because he knew the formation and the system and the head coach so well that it didn't feel like that much of a punt. But I think the reality is that as we're seeing, the competition for a small group of championship experienced strikers is so fierce that I think Sunderland probably having to be realistic and look at alternative options as well. I think it's fairly clear from the reporting over the weekend that Ben Brereton Diaz and Tom Cannon will almost certainly both go to Sheffield United. Brereton Diaz, he wanted the Sheffield United move for personal reasons. He played there last season. He knows Chris Wilder. It's an environment he feels settled in. With Tom Cannon, it looks, although it's not confirmed yet, it looks as if Sheffield United are paying a big fee now, whereas, as we know, Sunderland prefer sort of a loan to buy in the event of promotion. So I think that the pool of sort of championship proven forwards is getting smaller every day, I think it's fair to say. So I think the Frigan one is definitely one to watch. But as I know James reported this morning, he did play for Westerlo last night. He came off the bench. So I think that gives you an indication that he's probably not going to be on a plane this morning to sign for Sunderland. So we'll have to wait and see how that one shakes out.
And obviously, James, we will see how it pans out. But if we take these sort of reports that are coming from the continent at the moment as having some sort of grain of truth to them, it sounds as if there might be a fairly hefty fee attached to Frigan if he does come through the door of the stadium.
Yeah, it's interesting, the reports from his Belgian club Westerlo. I think they'd quite like to cash in and make some money on him. And it seems to be an issue, or the talks seem to be ongoing regarding that fee and basically when it comes and how it comes. There's obviously, it's been mooted that there would be an obligation to buy if Sunderland got promoted. I think Westerlo would like to have some money in the event that they didn't get promoted, whether Sunderland would still want to do that deal financially for a cut price while they were still in the championship. I don't know. We've spoken about it before, Jace, haven't we, that, and we're throwing it ahead a bit now, but if Sunderland did get promoted to the Premier League or did have, multiple agreements in place to sign players at the end of the season, then you are actually sort of accounting for a lot of your budget already, aren't you? Now, Sunderland seem to be stepping up the transfer business a little bit, which is good, but you do have to be a little bit careful, don't you, not to hamstring yourselves over, preceding seasons. Just thinking of Hull City, actually, who are near the bottom of the championship, they sort of seemingly overextended themselves a bit, didn't they? Stoke City over the years spent a lot of money. Now they can't due to the rules. They could potentially change, but you have to play the field in front of you. And whilst it's good that Sunderland are prepared to spend money, I'm not disputing that at all. I think that's probably why we're seeing a little bit of caution and a little bit of negotiation around this deal, is that does it work properly and does it work financially in the long term? And that has to be weighed up, of course, against the prospect of promotion this season as well, which would bring a lot of money into the club. So I think it's a balancing act and a tightrope, and I don't envy the decision makers at all.
Obviously, like Phil was saying, Cannon and Burton Diaz both looking as if they're going to end up at Bramall Lane. I mean, does that represent almost a double blow to Sunderland in the sense that not only are they, looking as if they're going to be able to land those two reported targets, but also that they're going to a major promotion rival this January?
Yeah, I mean it's only a blow if they do well and Sheffield United get promoted ahead of Sunderland, isn't it? So I think it's outcome based. You'd absolutely have to see. Tom Cannon's a player I liked. Reports were that he was sort of prepared to come to Sunderland as well, but Leicester have favoured that bid from Sheffield United. Obviously, they're under new ownership. So Chris Wilder's quite encouraged that they're going to spend a little bit of cash. The Burton Diaz one, although there were sort of links there, it did always feel like his preferred destination was always going to be Sheffield United. He spent time on loan there last season, didn't he, under Chris Wilder? So it always felt like that one was a little bit unlikely. I think the Tom Cannon one is unfortunate because obviously Sunderland have been a fan of him for quite a while. He scored a couple of times against Sunderland as well. I think he would have been sort of a great option to have up there with Wilson Isidore. But I think there are still options out there in the market. But as Phil mentions, time ticks away quickly in January, and before you know it, it'll be deadline day. Whether Sunderland have that striker in before then is another matter. Could we be in another Kiefer Moore situation where we're all waiting for him to sign, but it doesn't happen, he goes somewhere else? That's the situation we want to avoid, isn't it, really? Because Ipswich managed to get promoted off the back of that. Now, I'm not saying Kiefer Moore would have fired Sunderland to the playoffs or promotion, because that was a Michael Beale side at the time, and then what happened afterwards with Mike Dodds. But I'd imagine he certainly would have helped Sunderland's season. So yeah, let's see what happens. But I think it's encouraging that Sunderland seem to be shopping in a slightly what's the best way to say it? A pool above what they have been, in a sense that they're looking at championship ready players or players with a lot of experience and players that can sort of come in and immediately help the squad. Those developmental signings, if they're there to be done, like a Romain Mundell last January, if something like that could be done, then fantastic. But I think it's good that Sunderland are pressing ahead with the needs of the team now, actually.
And in terms of other positions, Phil, obviously we heard Lebris say in the wake of Adjelisa's injury blow that Sunderland were potentially one defender away from being in a bit of a problem. Obviously, without speculating on the Chris Mepham situation too much, if he is going to be out for a period of time, could you then foresee Sunderland potentially going back into the market and maybe bringing in a little bit more cover?
Yeah, potentially. I think they might have to. As you say, it depends on the extent of Mepham's injury. I think if it's not a hugely serious one, they'll just try and wait it out. But I think that, if he is out for a period of time, I think they will. I think they'll have to, because the logic so far this season, and so far, to be fair, it's largely been borne out, is that we've all said, there's a lack of fullback cover. And Sunderland are very much seeing Luke O'Nien as the fullback cover because they feel he can play either fullback position very well. But if Mepham's out for a long time, then O'Nien becomes one of your two main centre-halves, which means that you then have literally no fullback cover with Elise out, apart from Leo Yelder on the left side, but obviously nothing on the right side. So for me, I think if we're serious about Sunderland trying to win promotion this season, I think it would be too big a risk not to bring another defender in, if Mepham is out for a period of time.
And in terms of outgoings, James, obviously one of the defensive options that Lebris had available to him was young Zach Johnson. He's gone out on loan to Notts County. I mean, what do you make of that move? It feels like a good step for him in his career.
Yeah, definitely needed to go out and get some game time. We spoke to Zach Johnson at Bloomfield Road in pre-season, and I was hugely impressed with his mentality, really. We asked him, me and Barnsley, Nick Barnes from the BBC, asked him about, regular game time, and he came out and said, look, I want to play, I need to be playing. He's obviously had experience at Hartlepool United and then a really good loan at Dundalk in Ireland as well. So I imagine he's been sort of frustrated at the lack of first team opportunities, whilst understanding that there's some very good defenders in Sunderland's squad and they've been flying high in the league. He's obviously a Sunderland fan, so I'm sure he's enjoyed being around the environment. But I think the loan to Notts County, it just offers that chance to get some regular experience in the EFL, which he actually hasn't had yet because Hartlepool are in the National League, obviously Dundalk and Ireland. So I think it's a move that makes sense. I thought he did well when he came on against Stoke City in the FA Cup the other weekend. A very disjointed back line towards the end, but I thought Zach Johnson did okay. So this will just allow him to sort of get up to speed, and then Sunderland can reassess. And I think it's good that Sunderland don't stand in the way of these loans when they need to be done. Obviously, you could argue that Sunderland are looking a bit slim defensively now with the injury to Chris Mepham, but I don't think there's any point really keeping Zach Johnson around just to be a squad player till the end of the season, because it would have taken a large injury crisis for him to be starting games. So I think it's a move that works best for everybody, and hopefully he does well. And he's got some good pedigree. He's played for England's youth sides before, so yeah, looking forward to seeing how he gets on.
And the other player who's left the Stadium of Light since we last spoke, Phil, is Aaron Connolly. Obviously joined the club as a free agent in September, scored just the one goal that came against Millwall, and now he's gone to Millwall to link up with former Sunderland boss Alex Neil. I mean, what do you make of that whole situation?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by how quickly it happened. I think, look, we spoke to Labrise, I can't remember after which game it was, possibly the Norwich game. No, the Portsmouth game, sorry, which was another game that I think he hadn't played in, or if he had, only for a few minutes off the bench. And that was when Labrise sort of first floated the idea that they would be having discussions with Connolly and sort of raised the possibility of him leaving, which I think came as a surprise to all of us at the time. I think it's just it's a decision really that's been the best interest of the player have been put first, and I think that's absolutely right in Connolly's situation. He obviously, when he first signed for the club, he spoke, really bravely and really candidly about what he'd been through over the last year or so, and sort of the place he'd got himself into now to sign for Sunderland. And I think that Sunderland have just been, Labrise especially, have just been really honest with Connolly and just saying, look, you aren't going to get past Isidore and Mienda. We are trying to sign another striker, and I think Connolly's put himself in looked at it and said, well, I've got 6 months left of my deal here. I need to be playing because he's got his long-term future to be thinking about. He can't afford to become a free agent in the summer having not played again for 8 months. So I think it's one that he pushed for, not because he was unhappy or frustrated, just because I think he understood the situation. So while it's a little bit risky at the moment, because obviously Sunderland haven't signed a striker yet, I think they've done right by him and letting him go. And I think Connolly's left in the right way, hasn't he? I thought his message was really classy last week when he left, and I think everyone associated with Sunderland really will just wish him the best, and hopefully he can kickstart his career now at Millwall.
Yeah, I mean, would you echo that, James? It obviously didn't quite work out for him on Weir's side, but full kudos to the way that he came out and spoke when he initially joined the club, and by and large, I think it's fair to say he's been a positive presence on Weir's side.
Yeah, wish him well. I think the way everybody's handled it has been fantastic. Again, it's good to see that Sunderland won't stand in players' ways unnecessarily. I think that's a real positive of the club and a real selling point of the club, actually. But yeah, you'll have to ask me that if it's a good decision when he plays against Sunderland at the Stadium of Light for Millwall, and we'll see how that goes. So yeah, I might be fuming with it in a couple of months' time.
Finally, we'll sort of take a look at a few of the names that have been repeatedly mentioned as potential exits this month. Is there any sort of movement, Phil, on the likes of, Jewison Bennett and Abdullah Bar, obviously in Adil Ashish now as well, because we saw him drop out of the side for Enzo Lafay on Friday. Are there any sort of indications that any of those players could be moving on over the coming weeks?
Yeah, I think Bar and Bennett, Sunderland is sort of actively pursuing that, and the players are. Sorry about that. With Ashish, I'm not convinced Ashish will go, and if he does, it will be right at the very end of the window, because I think that Watson and Mundell are still a couple of weeks away. And although I fell for him on Friday because it was harsh for him not to be in the team because he's played well, but I still think he's got a role to play in a 3-game week. I don't see Lafay playing 90 minutes 3 times off the left, you know what I mean? So I still think Ashish has got a big part to play. What's been very obvious over the last few weeks is that he's not pushing to leave Sunderland. Like, he's not trying to find a move. The ideal scenario for him is he wants to play his way into the team. Now, obviously, if it gets to the end of the month and he feels as if he's fourth, fifth choice out on the left wing, then he might have the decision almost taken out of his hands. But for now, you never know in football, things can change quickly. But I don't envisage any quick movement on that. I think if anything happens, and I think that's a big if, it'll be right at the end of the month.
And another one as well, obviously Nazari Rusyn, it's kind of felt as if he is destined to maybe find a fresh challenge elsewhere, James. But obviously with Connolly leaving and with suggestions that Sunderland are, probably going to bring in one more striker, do you think that there's an element of him almost having to stick around for the time being so that they have that cover if it is needed?
I think so. I would imagine that if/when Sunderland sign a striker, particularly if he can play on the left side, which is what's been mooted, isn't it? Then I imagine the door will be open for Rusyn to go. Just one of those that hasn't worked out. Obviously, people forget as well. I think he joined the club in pretty trying circumstances for him. He was over here for a long time by himself without his young family, who I think was still home in Ukraine. Obviously, with the problems with Russia there as well. So he's never really managed to get a sort of a run, has he? Obviously, he did score a couple of goals, but sort of a casualty of Sunderland's managerial merry-go-round as well last season. Obviously, with Mowbray and then Mike Dodds, then Beale and Mike Dodds, it was hard for any of those players to get any sort of continuity. Sunderland now just appear to have moved on slightly in terms of team selection, obviously with the emergence of Mundell and Watson. I know they're injured at the moment, but it just doesn't really seem to have worked for him. And it was always going to be hard for him to get in on the left over Jack Clarke when he was at the club. So I think, one of those where it's best for all parties that he probably moves on at some point. When that is, I don't know, but I would imagine common sense that would be after Sunderland sign a left-sided attacker. And I think, we didn't really think Adil Al-Shish was a winger or a left-sided attacker, did we? We thought of him more as a central midfield player or a number 10, and the fact that he was given the nod at left wing over Rusyn probably speaks to where Labrisse's mind is. Although Labrisse has said a couple of times that he actually likes the player, doesn't he? And he has trusted him to bring him on towards the end of games, but he hasn't started a game under Labrisse. I don't think Rusyn has. He? Phil might correct me on that, but I don't think he started a game in the league under Labrisse.
Certainly not the league. No, I can't remember if he started against Preston, but definitely not in the league. I think to be honest, Preston, I think it is time for Rusyn to move on, because I think the other thing as well is I did think Rusyn was a bit of an odd signing in that he seemed like very much he's got a lot of good qualities, his work rate, his athleticism. Didn't really feel like it fit Sunderland's style of play last season, especially under Mowbray. That very sort of technical build-up. Actually, what we've seen in recent weeks from Labrisse when Mienda and Isidore have played a lot more direct, a lot more counter-attacking. To be honest, I think that style should really suit Rusyn. Like when I watch him and what I think his skills are, and I think the fact that it hasn't happened even despite that slight shift, I think probably tells you it isn't going to happen. But I think, Jason, your instincts are probably right. I think someone might say, look, you can absolutely go out and get some minutes on loan and we'll review it in the summer, but let's get our striker in first, and then we'll feel comfortable in letting you do that.
Okay, lovely stuff. That's all we've got time for on this week's show. Join us again next week when we'll be discussing all of the latest Sunderland news and developments. In the meantime, follow all the latest Black Cats news on the Sunderland Echo. You can give us a follow on social media as well. Thanks to James. Thanks to Phil. Thanks to you for listening. We'll see you next week.